Hey guys, this is Cassidy, and today we're going to read part 12 of Cinder by Marissa Meyer. Chapter 31. It was a long walk home. Adri and Pearl had left the market without her, anxious to get ready for the ball, which had been a relief to Cinder at first, but after the first mile of walking with her makeshift crutches digging into her arms and messenger bag banging against her hip, she was cursing her stepmother with each limping step. Not that Cinder was in any big hurry to get home. She couldn't imagine what preparations she could assist Pearl with, but she didn't doubt they would be designed to torture her. One more evening of servitude. One more evening. The words propelled her on. When she finally reached the apartment, she found the hallways eerily quiet. Everyone was either down at the festival or getting ready for the ball. The shouts that would normally be heard behind closed doors had been swapped for girlish laughter. Cinder tucked her crutches beneath her sore arms and used the wall to guide her to the door. The apartment seemed empty as she entered it, but she could hear the floors creaking as Adri and Pearl moved around their bedrooms toward the back. Hoping she might be able to make it through the whole evening without seeing either of them, Cinder hobbled to her small room and closed the door behind her. She had just thought to start packing in earnest when someone knocked at the door. Sighing, she opened it. Pearl was in the hallway, wearing her golden gown, all silk and seeded pearls and a neckline that plunged just how Adri had requested. Could you have come home any slower? She said. We'll be leaving as soon as the coronation is over. I'm sure I could have come home faster, except someone stole my foot. Cinder glared briefly, then stepped back into the hallway and did a half spin, letting the skirt billow around her ankles. What do you think, Cinder? Will the prince notice me in this? Cinder barely restrained the urge to slime her own filthy hands all over the dress. Instead, she peeled off her work gloves and tucked them into her back pocket. Is there something you needed? Yes, actually, I wanted to ask your opinion. Cinder hitched up her skirt to reveal mismatched shoes on her tiny feet. On her left foot was a small velvet boot the color of fresh milk that laced up her ankle. On her right foot was a gold sandal tied with sparkling ribbons and tiny heart-shaped charms. Given that you're so close to the prince, I thought I would ask you if you'd prefer the gold slippers or the white. Cinder pretended to think. The boots make your ankles look fat. Cinder smirked. The metal plating makes your ankle look fat. You're just jealous because I have such lovely feet. She sighed in mock sympathy. What a shame you will never know the pleasure. I'm just glad you found at least one body part that's lovely. Cinder tossed her hair, a smug grin on her face. She knew that Cinder's jest had no grounding, and Cinder was irritated when the low insult brought her no pleasure. I've been rehearsing my conversation with Prince Kai, said Pearl. Of course, I intend to tell him everything. She swayed so her skirt caught the light. First, I'm going to tell him all about your ugly metal extremities and how much of an embarrassment you are. What a disgusting creature they turned you into. And I'm going to make sure he realizes how much more desirable I am. Cinder leaned against the doorframe. I wish I would have known about this little crush of yours earlier, Pearl. You know, before Peony passed away. I was able to make a promise. I was able to obtain a promise from His Highness that he would dance with Peony tonight. Could have asked the same for you, but I guess it's too late for that now. Shame. Pearl's face flushed. I guess it's too late for that now. Shame. Pearl's face flushed. You shouldn't even say her name, she said, her voice a harsh whisper. Cinder blinked. Peony? The anger in Pearl's eyes grew intense, overtaking the childish taunts. I know you killed her. Everyone knows it is your fault. Cinder gaped at her, unbalanced by the sudden switch from her immature boast. That's not true. I never got sick. It's your fault she was at the junkyard. That's where she caught it. Cinder opened her mouth, but her jaw just hung. If it wasn't for you, she would be going to the ball tonight, so don't try to pretend you would have done her any favors. The best thing you could have done for Puny would have been to leave her alone. Then maybe she'd still be here. Tears were pooling in Pearl's eyes. And you pretend like you cared about her, like she was your sister, and that's not fair. She was sick, and you were meeting the prince, trying to catch his attention, when you knew how she felt about him. It's sick. Cinder folded her arms, protecting herself. I know you don't believe this, but I really did love Peony. Cinder sniffed once, loudly, as if to stop the crying before it could overtake her. You're right, I don't believe you. You're a liar and a thief, and you don't care about anyone but yourself. She paused, and I'm going to make sure the prince knows it. The door to Adri's bedroom opened, and she stepped out wearing a white and magenta kimono embroidered with elegant cranes. What are you two bickering about now? Pearl, are you ready to go? She eyed Pearl with a shrewd eye, trying to determine if anything still needed work. I can't believe you're going, said Cinder. What will the people think when you're still in mourning? She knew it was a button she shouldn't push, an unfair comment that she'd heard them both crying through the thin walls. But she wasn't in the mood to be fair. If she'd had a choice, she wouldn't have gone. Not without puny. Adri fixed a cold glare on her, lips taut. The coronation is starting, she said. Go wash the hover. I want it to look brand new. Glad she wouldn't be forced to sit through the coronation with them, Cinder made no argument as she grabbed her crutches and headed back toward the door. One more evening. She turned on her netlink as soon as she reached the elevator, delegating the coronation proceedings to a corner of her vision. It was still the pre-ceremony. A parade of government officials was marching into the palace, swarmed by a sea of journalists and cameras. She picked up a bucket and soap in the storage room before hobbling down to the parking garage, laughed listening as the newscaster explained the symbolism behind different elements of the coronation. The embroidery on Kai's robe, the designs in the crest that would be raised when he took his vows, the number of times the gong would be struck, all practices that had been around for centuries, cobbled together from the many cultures that had come together to form the Commonwealth. The news continuously switched between the festival and the city center to the occasional shot of Kai during his preparations. Only these latter bits snagged Cinder's attention away from the bucket of sudsy water. She couldn't help imagining she was in the palace with him, rather than this dim, cool garage. Kai shaking hands with some unknown delegate. Kai greeting the crowd. Kai trying to steal a private conversation with his advisor. Kai turning toward her, smiling at her, glad she was by his side. The momentary glimpses of him made Cinder's heart feel soothed rather than injured. It was a reminder that much bigger things were happening in the world, and Cinder's yearning for freedom and Pearl's taunts and Adri's whims and even Kai's flirting with her didn't fit into that bigger picture. The Eastern Commonwealth was crowning its new emperor. Today the whole world was watching. Kai's clothing blended old and new traditions. Turtle doves embroidered across his mandarin collar signified peace and love. Draped over his shoulder was a midnight blue cloak embroidered with 6 silver stars, signifying the peace and unity of the 6 earthen kingdoms, and a dozen chrysanthemums, signifying the 12 provinces of the Commonwealth and how they would flourish under his reign. A royal advisor stood beside Kai on the platform. The first rows of the crowd were made up of government officials from every branch and province, but Cinder's eyes were always drawn back to Kai, magnetically latching onto him again and again. Then a small entourage came down from the aisles, the last to take their seats. Queen Lavanna, along with 2 thaumaturges. The queen was wearing a delicate white veil that draped to her elbows, hiding her face and making her look more like a phantom than a royal guest. Cinder shivered. She didn't think any lunars had ever been present at a Commonwealth coronation. Rather than making her feel hopeful for the future, the sight filled Cinder with a lump of anxiety. Because Lavanna's haughty stance suggested that she belonged there more than any of the earthen citizens, as if she were the one to be coronated. The queen and her entourage claimed their reserved seats in the first row. Those seated around them tried, unsuccessfully, to hide their distaste at being so close to her. Cinder pulled the sopping rag from the bucket and put her apprehension to work. Scrubbing Adri's hover to a fine gleam. The coronation began with a thunder of drums. Prince Kai kneeled on a silk-covered platform as a slow parade of men and women passed before him, each dropping a ribbon or a medallion or jewel around his neck. Each was a symbolic gift. Long life, wisdom, goodness of heart, generosity, patience, joy. When all the necklaces had been placed on him, the camera zoomed in on Kai's face. He appeared surprisingly serene, his eyes lowered but his head held high. It was customary, as was customary, a representative from one of the other 5 kingdoms had been selected to officiate the coronation, in order to show that the other countries would honor and respect the new suzerain's right to govern. They had selected the European Federation's Prime Minister Bromstad, a tall, blond man with broad shoulders. Cinder had always thought that he looked more like a farmer than a politician. He held out an old-fashioned paper scroll that contained all the promises Kai was making to his people when he accepted the role of emperor. As both of the Prime Minister's hands gripped either end of the scroll, he spoke a series of vows, and Kai repeated after him. I solemnly swear to govern the peoples of the Eastern Commonwealth according to the laws and customs as laid down by the generations of past rulers, he recited. I will use all the power bestowed on me to further justice, to be merciful, to honor the inherent rights of all peoples, to respect the peace between all nations, to rule with kindness and patience, and to seek the wisdom and counsel of my peers and brethren. All this I promise to do today and for all the days of my reign, before all the witnesses of the earth and heavens. Cinder's heart swelled as she rescrubbed the hood. She had never seen Kai look so serious or so handsome. She feared for him a bit, knowing how nervous he must be, but in that moment he wasn't the prince who had brought a broken android to the market or almost kissed her in an elevator. He was her emperor. Prime Minister Bromstad lifted his chin. I hereby proclaim you Emperor Kaido of the Eastern Commonwealth. Long live his Imperial Majesty. The crowd burst into cheers and animated chants of Long live the Emperor as Kai turned to face his people. If he were happy at his raised position, it was impossible to tell. His lips were neutral, his gaze reserved as he stood on the dais and the applause of the crowd surged around him. After a long moment of his own serenity clashing with the tornado of praise, a podium was brought to the stage for the Emperor's first address. The crowd quieted. Cinder dashed water over the vehicle. Kai stood expressionless for a moment, staring at the edge of the platform, his fingers gripping the podium's sides. I'm honored, he began, that my coronation coincides with our most revered holiday. 126 years ago, the nightmare and catastrophe that was the Fourth World War ended, and the Eastern Commonwealth was born. It grew out of the unification of many peoples, many cultures, many ideals. It was strengthened by a single enduring belief that together, we as one people are strong. We have the ability to love each other, no matter our differences, to help each other no matter our weaknesses. We chose peace over war, life over death. We chose to crown one man to be our sovereign, to guide us, to uphold us. Not to rule, but to serve. He paused. Cinder pulled her focus away from the retina display for long enough to give the hover a quick inspection. It was too dark to tell if she'd done a decent job, but she had lost interest in perfection. Content, she dropped the wet rag into the bucket and sank against the concrete wall behind the row of parked hovers, giving her tiny screen her full attention. I am the great-great-great-grandson of the first emperor of the Commonwealth, Kai continued. Since his time, our world has changed. We continue to face new problems, new heartaches. Though a war between men has not been fought on earthen soil in 126 years, we now fight a new battle. My father was fighting a war against litymosis, the pestilence that has ravaged our planet for over a dozen years. This disease has brought death and suffering to our doorstep. The good people of the Commonwealth and all of our earthen siblings have lost friends, family, loved ones, neighbors. And with these losses, we face loss of trade and commerce, downturn of economy, worsened living conditions. Some have gone without food because there aren't enough farmers to toil the land. Some have gone without heat as our energy supplies dwindle. This is the war we now face. This is the war my father was determined to end, and I now vow to take up that torch. Together we will find a cure for this disease. We will defeat it, and we will return our great country to its former splendor. The audience applauded. But Kai showed no sign of joy at his words. His expression was resigned, dark. It would be naive of me, he said when the audience had quieted, not to mention a second kind of conflict, one no less deadly. The crowd wrestled. Cinder leaned her head back against the cold wall. As I'm sure you're all aware, the relationship between the allied earthen nations and Luna has also been strained for many generations. As I'm sure you're also aware, the sovereign of Luna, Her Majesty Queen Lavanna, has honored us with her presence for the past week. She is the first lunar sovereign to step foot on this earth for almost a century, and her presence indicates hope for a time of true peace between us is approaching. The screen panned out, showing Queen Lavanna in the front row. Her milky hands were folded demurely in her lap, as if she were humbled by the recognition. Cinder was sure she fooled no one. My father spent the last 10 years of his life in discussion with Her Majesty in hopes of seeking an alliance. He didn't live to see the result of those discussions, but I'm determined that his efforts will live on in me. It is true that there have been obstacles on this road to peace, that we have had difficulties finding a common ground with Luna, a solution that would serve both parties. but I have not given up hope that a resolution can be found. His gaze dropped down to the podium, his fingers locked around the edges. Cinder leaned forward as if she could get a closer look at the prince as he struggled with his next words. I will. He paused again, straightened, and focused his eyes on some distant, invisible point. I will do whatever needs to be done to ensure the well-being of my country. I'll do whatever needs to be done to keep you all safe. That is my promise. He peeled his hands from the podium and walked off before the crowd could think to applaud, leaving a sprinkle of concern but polite clapping behind him. Cinder's heart strangled her as the screen allowed another glimpse of the Lunars in the front row. The veil may have hidden the queen's conceit, but the smug grins on her two attendants couldn't be mistaken. They believed they had won. Chapter 32. Cinder waited half an hour before limping back to the elevator. The apartment building had come to life again. She kept herself plastered to the wall, crutches tucked behind her, as her neighbors danced by in their fine clothes. A few pitying glances turned on Cinder as she kept out of their way, careful not to smudge any of the beautiful dresses, but mostly her neighbors ignored her. Making it to the apartment, she shut the door behind her and listened for a moment of the blissful emptiness of the living room. She ran a mental checklist of everything she wanted to grab, green text scrolling across her vision. In her room, Cinder spread out her blanket and filled it with her few belongings. Oil-stained clothes, tools that had never made their way back to the toolbox, silly little gifts that Ego had given to her over the years, like a gold ring that was actually a rusted washer. Both Ego's personality chip and Peony's ID chip were tucked safely in their calf compartment, where they would stay until she found a more permanent home for them. She shut her eyes suddenly tired. How was it that with freedom so close to the horizon, she suddenly had the overwhelming desire to lie down and take a nap? All those long nights fixing the car were catching up with her. Shaking off the feeling, she finished packing as fast as she could, trying her best not to think of the risks she was taking. She'd be considered a runaway cyborg for real this time, and if she were ever caught, Adri would have her imprisoned. She kept her hands moving, trying not to think of Ego, who should have been at her side, or Puny, who should have made her want to stay, or Prince Kai, Emperor Kai. She would never see him again. She knotted the blanket corners with an angry tug. She was thinking too much. She had to just leave. One step at a time, and soon she'd be in the car, and all this would be behind her. Settling the makeshift bag over her shoulder, she hobbled her way back to the hall and down a labyrinth of underground storage spaces. Limping into the storage room, she dropped the bag on the floor. She paused for only a moment to catch her breath before she continued, unlatching the top of the handheld toolbox and shoveling everything off the desk into it. There would be time for sorting later. The standing toolbox that came nearly to her chest was much too big to fit in the car and would have to be left behind. Her gas mileage would have been ruined with all that weight in the bag anyway. She surveyed the room where she spent most of the past 5 years. It was the closest thing to a home she'd ever known. Even with the chicken wire that felt like a cage and the box that smelled of mildew, she didn't expect to miss it too much. Peony's crumpled ball gown was still draped over the welter. It, like the toolbox, wouldn't be coming with her. She moved to the towering steel shelves against the far wall and began rummaging for parts that would be useful for the car or even her own body should anything malfunction, throwing the pieces of miscellaneous junk into a heap on the floor. She paused as her hand stumbled across something she never thought she'd see again. The small, battered foot of an 11-year-old cyborg. She lifted it from the shelf where it had been tucked out of sight. Ego must have saved it, even after Cinder had asked her to throw it away. Perhaps, in Ego's mind, it was the closest thing to an android. Perhaps in Ego's mind, it was the closest thing to an android shoe she would ever own. Cinder cradled the foot against her heart. How she hated this foot. How overjoyed she was to see it now. With an ironic smile, she slumped into her desk chair for the last time. Pulling off her gloves, she eyed her left wrist, trying to picture the small chip just beneath the surface. The thought brought Puny to mind, her blue-tipped fingers, the scalpel against her pale skin. Cinder shut her eyes, forcing the memory away. She had to do this. She reached for the utility knife in the corner of her desk, the blade soaking in a tin can filled with alcohol. She shook it off, took a deep breath, and rested her cyborg hand palm against the desk. She recalled seeing the chip on Dr. Erlin's holograph, less than an inch away from where her skin met metal. The challenge would be getting it out without accidentally splicing any important wires. Forcing her mind to quiet, her hand to still, she pressed the blade into her wrist. The pain bit into her, but she didn't flinch. Steady, steady. A beep startled her. Cinder jumped, pulling the blade away and spinning around to face the wall of shelving. Her heart pummeled against her ribs as she scanned all the parts and tools that would be left behind. It beeped again. Cinder's eyes dropped to the old net screen that was still propped against the shelves. She knew it was disconnected from the net, and yet a bright blue square was flashing in the corner. Another beep. Setting down the knife, Cinder slinked away from her chair and kneeled before the screen. On the blue square was scrawled, "Direct link request received from unknown user. Accept." Tilting her head, she spotted the decom chip still inserted in the screen's drive. The small green light beside it glowed. In the shadow of the screen, it looked like any other chip, but Cinder remembered Kai's response when she described the chip's shimmery silver metal. A lunar chip. She grabbed a dirty bag from the pile of junk and pressed it against the barely bleeding wound. Screen, accept a link. The beeping stopped. The blue box disappeared. The spiral turned over in the screen. Hello? Cinder jumped. Hello? Is anybody there? Whoever she was, she sounded on the verge of a breakdown. Please, oh please, someone answer. Where is that stupid android? Hello? Hello? Cinder leaned in toward the screen. The girl gasped, followed by a short silence. Hello? Can you hear me? Is somebody? Yes, I can hear you. Hold on, something's wrong with the vid cables. Oh, thank heavens, the voice said as Cinder set aside the rag. She set the screen face down on the concrete and opened the door to its control panel. I thought maybe the chip had gotten damaged or I'd programmed it to the wrong connection ID or something. Are you in the palace now? Cinder found the vid cable disconnected from the plug. It must have come loose when Adri had knocked it off the wall. Cinder screwed it in and a flood of light splattered across the floor. There we are, she said, righting the screen. She jolted back when she saw the girl on the other side of the connection. She must have been close to Cinder's age and had the longest, waviest, most unruly mess of tangled blonde hair imaginable. The golden nest around her head was tied in a big knot over one shoulder and cascaded in a jumble of braids and snarls, wrapping around one of the girl's arms before descending out of the screen's view. The girl was fidgeting with the ends, fervently winding and unwinding them around her fingers. If it weren't for the mess of hair, she would have been pretty. She had a sweet heart-shaped face, giant sky-blue eyes, and a sprinkle of freckles across her nose. She was somehow not at all what Cinder had been expecting. The girl looked equally surprised at seeing Cinder and her cyborg hand and dreary t-shirt. Who are you? The girl asked. Eyes darted behind Cinder, taking in the dim lighting and the chicken wire. Why aren't you at the palace? I wasn't allowed to go, Cinder answered. She squinted at the room behind the girl, wondering if she were looking at a home on the moon, but it didn't look like any home at all. Rather, the girl was surrounded by metal walls and machines and screens and computers and more controls and buttons and lights than a cargo ship's cockpit. Cinder folded her leg, letting her footless calf dangle more comfortably over her thigh. Are you lunar? The girl's eyes fluttered, as if caught off guard by the question. Instead of answering, she leaned forward. I need to speak with someone at the new Beijing palace right away. Then why don't you calm the palace information board? I can't. The girl's shriek was so unexpected, so desperate that Cinder nearly fell over. I don't have a global comm chip. This is the only direct link I've been able to get down to Earth. So you are lunar. The girl's eyes widened to near-perfect circles. That's not... Who are you? Said Cinder, her voice raising. Are you working for the Queen? Are you the one who installed the chip in that android? You are, aren't you? The girl's eyebrows drew together, but rather than looking irritated at Cinder's questions, she appeared frightened, even ashamed. Cinder clenched her jaw against the onslaught of questions and took in a slow breath before answering, steadily. Are you a lunar spy? No, of course not. I mean, well, sort of. Sort of? What do you mean? Please listen to me. The girl clenched her hands together, as if fighting an internal battle. Yes, I programmed the chip, and I am working for the Queen, but it's not what you think. I programmed all the spyware that Levon has used to watch Emperor Weekend these past months, but I didn't have a choice. Mistress would kill me if stars above. She will kill me if she finds out about this. Mistress who? You mean Queen Levana? The girl squeezed her eyes tight, her face contorted with pain. When she opened her eyes again, they were glistening. No. Mistress Sybil. She is Her Majesty's head thaumaturge and my guardian. Recognition pinged in Cinder's head. Kai had suspected the Queen's thaumaturge of putting a chip in 90 in the first place. But she's more like a captor, really, the girl continued. I'm nothing to her but a prisoner and a slave. She hiccuped on the last word and buried her face in a bundle of hair, sobbing. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm an evil, worthless, wretched girl. Cinder felt her heart tug in sympathy. She could relate to being a slave for her guardian, but she couldn't recall ever actually being afraid that Adrian might kill her. Well, other than the time she sold her off for her plague research. She clenched her jaw against the mounting pity, reminding herself that this girl was Lunar. She had helped Queen Levana spy on Emperor Rikan and on Kai. She briefly wondered if the girl was only manipulating her emotions now, before she remembered that Lunars couldn't control people through the net screens. Blowing some hair out of her face, Cinder leaned forward and yelled, Stop it, stop crying. The girl stopped. She peered up at her with big, watery eyes. Why were you trying to get a hold of the palace? The girl shrank back and sobbed, but the tears seemed to have been startled out of her. I need to get a message to Emperor Kai. I need to warn him. He's in danger. All of Earth. Queen Levana, and it's all my fault. If I'd only been stronger, if I'd only tried to fight, this wouldn't have happened. It's all my fault. Stars above, would you stop crying? Said Cinder before the girl could solve into hysterics again. You need to get a hold of yourself. What do you mean Kai's in danger? What have you done? The girl hugged herself, eyes pleading with Cinder as if she alone could offer forgiveness. I'm the Queen's programmer, like I said. I'm good at it. Hacking into netlinks and security systems and the like. She said this without a hint of arrogance on her wavering voice. For the past few years, Mistress has been asking me to connect feeds from Earth's political leaders to Her Majesty's palace. At first, it was just court discussions, meetings, document transfers, nothing very interesting. Her Majesty wasn't learning anything that your Emperor hadn't already told her, so I didn't think much harm could come of it. The girl twisted her hair around both sets of knuckles. But then she asked me to program a decom chip that she could install on one of the royal androids, thinking then she could spy on the Emperor outside of the net links. She raised her eyes to Cinder. Guilt was scrawled on her face. If it had been any other android, any android in the entire palace, she wouldn't know anything. But now she does know, and it's all my fault. She whimpered and pulled the lock of hair into her mouth like a gag. Wait. Cinder held up a hand, trying to slow the girl's rapid words. What exactly does Levana know? The girl pulled the hair out as tears started to slip down her cheeks. She knows everything the android knew, everything she'd been researching. She knows that Prince Alina is alive and that Emperor Kai was searching for her. She knows that the Emperor wanted to find the princess and instate her as the true Lunar Queen. Dread squirmed inside Cinder's stomach. She knows the names of the doctors who helped her escape and this poor old woman in the European Federation who housed her for so long. Her Majesty's already sent people to hunt her down, using the information Kai had. And when they find her... But what would she do to Kai? Cinder interrupted. Levana's already won. Kai all but said he was going to give her what he wants. So what does it matter now? He tried to usurp her. You don't know the Queen, her grudges. She'll never forgive this. I have a message to get to him, to somebody at the palace. He has to know it's a setup. A setup? What kind of setup? To become Empress. Once she's in control of the Commonwealth, she intends to use her army to wage war on the rest of Earth. And she can do it too. Her army... She shuddered, ducking her head as if someone had swiped at her. Cinder shook her head. Kai wouldn't allow it. Doesn't matter. Once she's Empress, she'll have no more use of him. Blood rushed in Cinder's ears. You think... But she'd be an idiot to try to kill him. Everyone would know it was her. Lunar suspected she killed Queen Channery and Princess Celine, but what can they do about it? They might think of rebellion, but as soon as they're in her presence, she brainwashes them into compliance again. Cinder rubbed her fingers over her brow. He was going to announce it at the ball tonight, she murmured to herself. He's going to announce his intent to marry her. Her heart was racing, thoughts spilling over in her brain. Levana knew she had been searching for Princess Celine. She would kill him. She would take over the Commonwealth. She would wage war on the whole planet. She grasped her head as the world spun around her. She had to warn him. She couldn't let him make the announcement. She could send him a call, but what were the chances he was checking them during the ball? The ball. Cinder peered down at her drab clothes, her empty ankle, Peony's dress, the old foot that Ego had saved, the silk gloves. Her head bobbed before she knew what she was agreeing to, and she used the shelves to pull herself into standing. I'll go, she muttered. I'll find him. Take the chip, said the girl on the screen, in case we need to contact each other. And please don't tell them about me. If my mistress ever found out... Without waiting on her to finish, Cinder bent over and pulled the chip from its drive. The screen went black. Chapter 33. The silk dress felt like poison ivy sliding over Cinder's skin. She stared down at the silver bodice with its trim of delicate lace, the full skirt, the tiny seed pearls, and wanted to shrivel inside the gown in despair. This was not her dress. She was a fake in it, an impostor. Oddly, the fact that it was wrinkled as an old man's face made her feel better. She snatched the old foot from the shelf, the small rusted thing she'd woken up with after her operation when she was a confused, unloved 11-year-old girl. She'd sworn to never put it on again. But at this moment it might have been made of crystal for how precious it looked to her. Plus, it was small enough to fit into Pearl's boots. Cinder fell under a chair and whisked out a screwdriver. It was the most hurried fix she'd ever done, and the foot was even smaller and more uncomfortable than she'd remembered. But soon she was on 2 feet again. The silk gloves felt too fine, too delicate, too flimsy, and she worried that she might snag them on some poorly placed screw. At least they too were covered in grease smudges, so completing the affront. She was a walking disaster, and she knew it. She'd be lucky if they let her into the ball at all. But she would deal with that when she got there. The elevator was empty as she made her way into the parking garage. She rushed toward the abandoned car, the boots dripping awkwardly on the concrete floor as she tried not to trip on the too small foot and sprain her ankle. She could feel it precariously attached at the end of her leg. Not having had time to connect it to her wired nervous system, she felt like she was dragging around a paperweight. She tried to ignore it, thinking only of Kai and the announcement he was supposed to make that night. She reached the dark corner of the garage, already sweating from her exertion, and knowing it would only get worse once she got out into the city's relentless humidity. Before her, the car was sandwiched between 2 sleek, chrome-accented hovers. Its awful orange paint was dulled by the garage's flickering lights. It didn't belong. Cinder knew how it felt. She slipped into the driver's seat, and the smell of old garbage and mildew embraced her. At least she'd replaced the seat stuffing and covered it in a scavenged blanket so that she didn't have to worry about sitting on rat droppings. Still, she could only imagine what stains the car's frame and floorboards were leaving on Peony's dress. Shoving her thoughts to the back of her mind, she reached under the steering column and grasped the power supply and circuit wire she'd already stripped and wrapped. She fumbled for the brown ignition wire. Holding her breath, she tapped the wires together. Nothing happened. A drop of sweat rolled down the back of her knee. She flicked them again. Please, please, please. A spark lashed out from the wires, followed by unhappy clattering from the engine. Yes, she pushed her foot down on the accelerator, revving the engine, feeling the car thrum and rumble beneath her. Cinder allowed one overwhelming cry of relief, then jammed her foot into the clutch and pulled the transmission out of neutral, reciting the instructions she downloaded a week ago and had been studying ever since. How to drive. Maneuvering out of the garage proved the most difficult part. Once on the road, her way was guided by solar street lamps and the pale yellow glow from apartment windows. The city's constant light was a blessing, as the car's headlights had been busted out. Cinder was surprised at how rocky the roads were, how much garbage and debris littered the pavement, since hovers no longer required an open path. The ride was jerky and harsh, and yet Cinder felt a surge of power with every turn of the wheel, part of the press of the accelerator, and rattle of the stick shift. A warm breeze blew through the missing back window, tousling Cinder's hair. The clouds had reached the city and hung threateningly over the skyscrapers, casting the evening in a gray shroud. Toward the other horizon, the sky was wide open and proudly displaying a ninth full moon of the year. A perfect spear in the blackened sky. Cinder floored the accelerator, pushing the car to go faster, to fly. And it flew. Not smoothly or gracefully like a hover, but with all the roar and power of a proud beast. She couldn't help but grin, knowing that she had done this. She had brought this monstrosity back to life. It owed her now, and it seemed to know it. She would have made it, she thought, as the palace came into view, towering over the city atop its jagged cliff. She would have been nearing the city limits by now, picking up speed, watching the lights blur past. Reaching for the horizon and never looking back. A splatter of rain hit the cracked windshield. Cinder gripped the steering wheel tighter as she stared up the twisting, winding drive to the palace entrance. There were no hovers to compete with. She would be the last guest to arrive. She crested the hill, reveling in the rush of escape, of freedom, of power. And then the torrent began again. Rain drenched the car, blurring the palace's lights. The sound pounded against the metal and glass. Without headlights, the world disappeared beyond the windshield. Cinder jammed her foot onto the brake pedal. Nothing happened. Panic surged through her, and she desperately pumped the stiff brake. A shadow loomed against the storm. Cinder screamed and covered her face. The car collided with a cherry blossom tree, rocking Cinder with a jolt. Metal crunched around her. The engine sputtered and died. The seatbelt burned across her chest. Shaking, Cinder gaped at the storm that surged against the windshield. Wet maroon-colored leaves fell from the overhead branches, sticking to the glass. She reminded herself to breathe as adrenaline coursed through her veins. A leak revealed itself along the weather stripping of her door's window, dripping down onto her shoulder. She held up her sodden gloves and wondered what exactly she was waiting for. Not pride, not respectability. Being soaked could almost be an improvement at this point. Gasping for a full breath, she pulled at the door handle and kicked out with her booted foot to force it open. She stepped out into a downpour, the rain cool and refreshing on her skin. Slamming the door shut, she turned to survey the damage, pushing her hair back off her forehead. The front end of the car was crumpled around the tree's trunk, the hood folded like an accordion to the passenger side fender. And the thought occurred to her a second later. There was her chance for escape. Gone. Shivering in the rain, she shoved the thoughts aside. There would be other cars. Right now, she just had to find Kai. Suddenly, the rain stopped pounding down on her. She glanced up at the umbrella overhead, then turned around. A greeter was staring at her with her car wreck with round eyes, his hands gripping the umbrella handle. "Oh, hi," she stammered. The man's disbelieving stare found its way to her. Her hair, her dress. She looked more repulsed by the second. Cinder snatched the umbrella from him and flashed a smile. "Thanks," she said, and dashed across the courtyard into the yawning double doors of the palace, dropping the umbrella at the stairs. Guards dressed in crimson uniforms lined the corridor, directing guests away from the elevator dock and toward the ballroom in the south wing, as if the clinking glasses and orchestral music weren't clear enough. The walk to the ballroom entrance was long and tedious. Cinder didn't know if the guards let their stoic gazes land on her as she passed by, wet boots squishing, and she dared not meet their eyes if they did. All her focus was busy being directed down her wiring into her lump of a foot. Be graceful, be graceful, be graceful. The music grew louder. The hall was ornamented with dozens of ornate stone statues. Gods and goddesses long forgotten, hidden cameras, disguised ID scanners. She felt a spark of paranoia, remembering that she still carried Peony's ID chip, stashed away in her leg compartment. She imagined alarms blaring and lights flashing when she realized she had 2 ID chips inside her. But nothing happened. Emerging from the hallway, she found herself at the top of the grand staircase that cascaded down the ballroom. The dance floor had been set up in the center, with round tables surrounding the space. Each table was bedecked with lavish orchid centerpieces and jade sculptures. The walls of the room were lined with folding silk screens, hand-painted with designs of cranes and tortoises and bamboo, ancient symbols of longevity that hinted at a single defining message: long live the emperor. From her vantage point, she could see the entire room, thriving with vibrant silks and crinolines, rhinestones and ostrich plumes. She sought out Kai. He wasn't hard to find, dancing. The crowd parted for him and his partner, the most beautiful, most graceful, divine woman in the room. The Lunar Queen. Cinder couldn't stifle a gasp of bewilderment at the sight of her. Her stomach flipped, the momentary awe turning to revulsion. The Queen held a poised smile, but Kai's expression was as unfeeling as stone as they waltzed across the marble floor. Cinder stepped back from the stairs before the Queen noticed her. She scanned the room, convinced that Kai had not made his announcement yet, or the atmosphere in the room wouldn't be so jolly. Kai was fine. He was safe. All she had to do was find a way to speak with him, somewhere private, and tell him the Queen's plans. Tell him the Queen knew about his search for her niece. Then it would be up to him to put off accepting the Queen's terms until... Well, Cinder knew nothing could put Queen Lavanna off forever, without convincing her to start the war she'd been threatening for so long. But maybe, just maybe, Princess Celine could be found before that happened. Letting out a slow breath, Cinder stepped out of the massive doorway and ducked behind the nearest pillar, stumbling on her tiny foot. Gritting her teeth, she glanced around, but the nearby guards and servants remained as disinterested as a concrete wall. Cinder plastered herself against the column, trying to smooth back her hair so she could at least pretend to be fitting in. The music ceased and the crowd began to applaud. She dared to peer down at the dance floor and saw Kai and Queen Lavanna parting ways. he with a stiff bow and she with the grace of a geisha. As the orchestra started again, the entire ballroom joined in the dancing. Cinder followed the queen's glossy brunette curls, heading toward a staircase on the other side of the room, the crowd parting eagerly before her. She scanned for Kai again, and found him heading in the opposite direction, toward her. Holding her breath, she inched away from the protective column. This was her chance. If only he would look up and see her. If only he knew where to. If only she could tell him everything and then slip away into the night, and no one would have to know she'd been there at all. She bunched the silver gown up in her fists, her eyes boring holes in the emperor's head, willing him to look up, look up, look up. Kai froze with a look of mild perplexity, and Cinder thought with a jolt that she'd succeeded. Had she just used her lunar gift? But then she noticed a spot of gold beside Kai, a frilly sleeve brushing his arm. Her breath caught. It was Pearl, brushing her fingertips against Kai's elbow. He was full of dazzling smiles and fluttering lashes as she dipped into a curtsy. Stomach clenching, Cinder sank back against the pillar. Pearl started to talk, and Cinder monitors Kai's expressions as her pulse pounded in her ears. At first he only attempted a weary smile, but soon there was confusion, surprise, an uncertain frown. She tried to guess what Pearl was saying. Yes, I'm the girl from the festival this morning. No, Cinder isn't coming. We wouldn't disrespect this momentous occasion by allowing my ugly cyborg stepsister to attend. Oh, you didn't know she's cyborg? Cinder shuddered, her eyes glued to the two of them. Pearl was going to tell Kai everything, and there was nothing she could do but watch and wait for the horrible moment when Kai realized he'd been flirting with a cyborg. He'd want nothing more to do with her. He wouldn't want to hear her excuses. She'd be forced to stumble after him to tell him the reason she'd come, feeling like the disgrace she was. Someone cleared his throat, and Cinder jumped out at her growing anxiety, nearly twisting her ankle. One of the servants had evidently got tired of standing motionless, and was now looking over her with a barely veiled revulsion. I beg your pardon, he said, with a tightness to his voice. I must scan your ID. Cinder instinctively pulled her hand away from him, pressing her wrist against her stomach. Why? His eyes darted to the row of guards, ready to call on them to have her escorted out at any moment. To ensure you're on the guest list, of course, he said, holding up a small handheld scanner. Cinder pressed her back into the pillar, nerves humming. But I thought everyone in the city was invited. Indeed they are. The man grinned, looking almost gleeful. Gleeful at the prospect of disinviting the girl before him. But we must ensure that we are receiving those who responded to their invitations. It's a security measure. Gulping, Cinder glanced out toward the dance floor. Kai was still being hounded by Pearl, and now Cinder could see Adri hovering not far off, looking primed to jump into the conversation. Should Pearl say anything to embarrass her? Pearl had not dropped her shy, flirtatious charm. She stood with her head bowed and one hand gingerly pressed against her collarbone. Kai still looked perplexed. Goosebumps racing up her arms, Cinder turned back to the courtier and attempted to channel Peony's tearful innocence. Of course, she said. Holding her breath, she stretched out her arm. She was concocting a number of excuses, justifications. Her RSVP must have gotten mixed up with someone else's, or perhaps there was some confusion. Or... the man jolted, his eyes staring up at the small screen. Cinder tensed, wondering what her chances were of knocking him out with a quick blow to the head or without any of the guards noticing. His bewildered eyes took another turn over her chest, her hair, and returned to the screen. She could see the internal struggle as his smile slowly turned up, attempting politeness. Why, Lin May, what a pleasure. We're so glad you could join us tonight. Her eyebrows shot up. You are? The man gave her a stiff bow. Please forgive my ignorance. I'm sure His Imperial Majesty will be glad you've arrived. Please step this way, and I'll have you announced. She blinked, dumbly following his arm as he stepped toward the stairs. Have me what? He tapped something into his sports screen before glancing back at Cinder. His gaze swooped over again, as if he couldn't believe what he was about to do, but his polite smile didn't fade. All personal guests of His Imperial Majesty are duly announced, as recognition of their import. Of course, they don't usually arrive so late. Wait, personal guests of... Oh, no. No, you don't have to. She was silenced by the blare of recorded trumpets through invisible overhead speakers. She ducked at the sound, eyes widening as the short melody faded. At the last trill of the horns, a majestic voice boomed through the whole ballroom. Please welcome to the 126th Ball of the Eastern Commonwealth, a personal guest of His Imperial Majesty, Cinder of New Beijing.